In the Gospel of John, 16 through 16 and 33rd verse, and I'll use three very brief verses, so it probably will not be helpful to turn to them. These things I have spoken unto you, that in me ye might have peace. Be of good cheer, for in the world ye shall have tribulation, but I have overcome the world. 1 John 3 and 4 says, For whosoever is born of God overcometh the world, and this is the victory that overcometh the world, even our faith. And 1 John 4 and 4 say, Ye are of God, little children, and have overcome them, because greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. Now, when I was told a couple nights ago that this was going to be casual day and that I was free to come in overalls or anything, something like that, I decided to wear the suit anyway. But when I got here and saw you all in overalls and the kind of clothes that people wore during the marches and demonstrations, it made it appear that the sermon that I had chosen was chosen in relationship to that, but actually it was not. But actually you look like the folks, you are dressed like the folk who were in those crowds when we used to march in Mississippi and in Alabama, and the people marched in North and South Carolina and in other places in the country. And in all of those marches, all of those meetings, those demonstrations, one of the things common to all of them was that they would sing, We shall overcome. And I thought it would be helpful today, interesting today, if we would reflect and revisit that song and the idea of that song and look at what is meant by that phrase, we shall overcome, and to see what people who are saying that were up against. What are they saying they are going to overcome? And if you would really take note of what they were saying they were going to overcome, and look at the force and the energy and the desire that they put into this overcoming, you might look at your circumstances a little bit different. This song grew out of the civil rights struggle. We shall overcome. And what did they have to overcome? They had injustice to overcome. They had hatred and bitterness to overcome. They had segregation and separation to overcome. They had all kinds of violence and danger to overcome. They had a nation that was divided on the basis of race, and they had a justice system that had left out a whole group of people based upon the color of their skin. They had all of that to overcome. And then there was white people in the civil rights movement. And there were plenty white people in the civil rights movement marching alongside the black people. And they had something to overcome also. They had to overcome the anger and the accusations of rejection by their own people as they went out and sided on the side of justice and equality. They had a lot to overcome. One of the sisters from the Catholic Church, I saw on TV that she had gone down to Selma, and when she got back, some people wrote her letters, and one of the letters that she read, that one of the persons had written her and said to her, "You're no longer a sister in the church. How could you call yourself a sister in the Catholic Church, and you're down there marching, demonstrating?" That's what they had to overcome. And she said that it was the most wonderful experience of her life. They had to overcome all of these things. Now, you know, young people, and they don't know why people like us, older people, don't really think that much of their excuses that they give for not doing things. Oh, I can't do this because life is difficult. I can't do that because I'm doing a lot of stuff. I can't do that because I don't have the money. I can't do that because people won't like me. I can't do that because, who cares? Great nations, great races will never be built on the shoulders of people who are complaining about the little indignities, the little inconveniences, and the little struggles of life. These people had a lot to overcome. And not only in all the things they had to overcome had nothing to do with their blackness. It was difficult times. Poverty was everywhere. The country was young. And they had to overcome things that had nothing to do with race. They had to overcome what Shakespeare calls the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. You know, this life has a lot of headaches and trouble that have nothing to do with the color of your skin. And you're going to have them anyway. And in order to keep going, you have to overcome. So these people had the spirit of overcomers. We shall overcome. Notice it doesn't say we might overcome. It does not say we'd like to overcome. It does not say in better circumstances we would overcome. It says in the situation that we are in, with the difficulties that we have in front of us, with the mountains that we have to climb, we shall overcome. You know, Lyndon Johnson was not a great speaker, but he was a great and effective president. Now, Lyndon Johnson wasn't a great speaker, but you see, great speeches are given about great causes. I don't care how eloquent you are and what your voice is like and how good and expansive your vocabulary is. You cannot give great speeches about junk. That's one of the reasons I don't like to do speeches to people who are not interested in great things, because great speeches can only be done about great things. Lyndon Johnson was not a great speaker. But I remember one of the things that he said as clearly as I remember anything that any president has said in my lifetime. I remember this man who was not a great speaker going on TV when black folk were marching in Selma and when the civil rights movement was at the height of its intensity. Lyndon Johnson went on television and looked in that camera and said to the people of this country, "We shall overcome." We have a problem in this country that's not just a Negro problem, he said. It is an American problem. A problem of injustice is all of our problem. And then he said, we shall overcome. And any white politician at the time who sided with civil rights risked being voted out of office. But he said, we shall overcome. Because their statement, this idea embodies something. And I think that the young people today ought to understand how these people could say, we shall overcome in those difficult circumstances, and believe it and do it. Well, the first thing that we should look at those people believed and why they could say, we shall overcome. They believe that you are sure to overcome if they were God's people. They believed that they were God's people doing God's will. They thought that they would overcome because they were God's people doing God's will. Isn't that fascinating? We are God's people. We are doing God's will. So we will overcome. You see, it's very important the side of anything that you start on. My students used to say, you can never win an argument with Mr. Jenkins. That he never loses arguments. Well, I don't. But it's not because I'm eloquent. It's not because I have an expansive vocabulary. That's not why I never lose arguments. I never lose arguments because I never start one on the wrong side. I never start one on the wrong side. I never talk about anything that I don't know what I'm talking about. And I talk about very few things that I don't know more about it than just about anybody in the conversation. Now that's why I don't lose arguments. And that's pretty simple. You don't have to know a lot. You just know the little stuff you know it well. You don't have to be all that smart. You just know some things well and stick with what you know. And you'll never lose an argument. Somebody else might out-talk you. Somebody else might look like they got the crowd on their side. But if you're telling the truth, time will prove you right. I told y'all when you first came here, you were going somewhere having meetings with this group and meeting with that group, and I told you when you first came here, you're not going to have a church over here until you get young people involved in it. I don't care whatever else you're doing. You're wasting your time. You cannot have a church without young folk. And we can just do all we want to a bunch of old folk and die one at a time. When the last one of us die, whoever comes to attend the funeral, turn the lights off and go on about their business. But that's what you'll have. So you want a church, you got to have young folk. That's why I call those young folk up this morning. To make them mad if they want to, that's all right. But if you want to have a church, you got to have young people. Old folk don't need a church. I don't ever need to go to church again. I'm going to keep the commandments anyway. I'm going to do right anyway. I got enough of that in me to last me from now on. It's the young folks that you need to pass that on to. See, these old folks here, they're not going to do anything wrong. Brother Green not going to do that much wrong. Sister Green not going to let it. Okay? So if he doesn't hear me preach, no big deal. Brother Handy's not going to do too much out the way. Miss Handy's not going to let him. But the young folk, they need to hear me preach and remind them to do right because God says do right. So these people, they felt that they were God's people doing God's will. And you have to believe something strongly. When the police are standing there, when the highway patrol is there, when they have their guns aimed at you and telling you to go home and stop your march and stop your singing, stop your protesting, and you say, we're going to march anyway because God is on our side. You have to believe that you are God's people doing God's will. You know, the young people today, you need to think when you are choosing your career in life, choosing your path in life, choosing your job in life, choosing your mate in life, choosing your interest in life, you would be well to know that these are the things that God wants you to do. Because regardless of what you're doing, it's going to get difficult sometimes. Because of what you're doing, it's going to get difficult sometimes. Because of how nice it is. I had one of my students come by yesterday, and he wanted to talk to me about some ventures that he had. And he said to me, now, Mr. J, here's what I want you to tell me. I want to know how I can convince people that I am doing this for the right reasons so that nobody will be against me. I laughed. And I said, well, it's important that they know you're doing it for the right reason. But don't you think that just because people know that you're doing something for the right reason, nobody's going to be against you? But if you're doing it for the right reason, and if you know that God has told you or approved of you doing what you're doing, when the way gets dark, you can say, we shall overcome. We shall overcome. So those people believed that they were God's people doing God's will. And when you're God's people doing God's will, you see problems differently. When you are God's people doing God's will, you see problems as instruments to toughen you rather than to destroy you. You see, I always assume that I'm going to win. Not just arguments, but I always assume that I'm going to make it. Because that's the attitude that we had to have back then down there. That I'm going to make it. I remember this man singing this song that might not have shoes to go on my feet, might not even have food for the little children to eat. But we're going to make it. So you have that attitude. When things come up, you have the attitude that we're going to make it. And God has sent this thing to test me and to strengthen me and not to destroy me. There's this Russian proverb that says, a hammer shatters glass, but it forges steel. That troubles make us tougher if we understand that God is with us and we see our problems as those things that come to make us strong. And you know, I think that young people should keep some older people in their lives. They should keep some older people in their lives. And one of the advantages of keeping older people, because I keep older people in my life and I keep younger people in my life. And one of the reasons I keep younger people in my life is because I'm reminded of how silly young people are and how much the Lord, and I was just as crazy as they were, and it reminds me of how much the Lord has blessed me that I'm not that way anymore. And so I keep the young people in my life for that reason. I also like to know what the other folks behind me are doing. And I've also had older people in my life. I want to know what they've been through and how they overcame. I want to know what they're talking about when they say, I look back and wonder how I got over. I want them to be able to tell me what kinds of things that they've done. I want them to be able to say, like the poet says, well, son, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's an accident and boards torn up and places with no carpet on the floor and bare. But all the time I've been reaching landings, turning corners, and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So, boy, don't you give up. Don't you sit down on the step because it's kind of hard. Because I still reaching and climbing and going on. And life for me ain't been no crystal stair. When people tell you what they have been through, it's sometimes, if you really are sensitive, it makes you feel petty sometimes, complaining about the things that you complain about. When I hear people who have done so much more with so much less, under so much more difficulty, I get embarrassed that I would complain. When people ask me to do some things sometimes, oh, I don't want to do that. And then I think of what God has done for me and how easy it is for me to do the things that the people ask me to do. How easy. And sometimes I go places and do speeches. I went down to Springfield a couple of days ago to do a speech with Chase Bank. And I went down there because this young friend of mine works at the bank and they wanted me to come. And I went. And, I had to go there and do this speech in this big place. And you're like, why you do stuff like that? You don't need the money. You don't need the applause. You don't need it. Why you do things like that? I do it because the folk who came before me did those kind of things to make it easy for me to do the kinds of things. And they're the reason that I don't need the money. You see, when you talk to older people and see what they've gone through, you will see that the problems that they encountered did not break them. They strengthened them. And if you see your problems that way, then you can say, in the face of all of those problems, we shall overcome. And finally, those people never let life and the devil trick them into replacing the we with I. They never allowed the devil or circumstances or anybody around them to trick them into replacing the we with an I. Oh, that is a dangerous thing. Those folks knew that it was we shall overcome. We shall overcome. You see, the world, the devil, the enemy would like for you to forget the we and replace it with I. Oh, that's a dangerous thing. I'm tempted sometimes to replace the we with an I. I remember I came upon a difficult place in my life. And I was going through things. And I lost my job in St. Louis as a teacher. I'm the one who started teaching almost before I was grown. I taught in college before I was 25 years old. The people at Washington University said that I was a natural. One teacher said I was the closest thing to a natural teacher she'd ever seen. But in St. Louis, because I was outspoken about some things, I was fired secretly. And I had to, they wrote on the folder that they laid off a lot of teachers and wrote on the folder that I was not to be rehired, and I didn't find that out till much later. But that's how I got into Parkway. I went out to the Parkway School District and was hired as a teacher's assistant, and I had to work for $36 a day. And it was 36 miles from my house to the school, a round trip. And there I was, the man who had been on radio in the South and lectured at colleges and universities all over the country. And there I was, working for $36 a day, running errands for other teachers. And I thought, I have been reduced to this. But somewhere in the background, I remembered Jesus saying, "Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel, and I will be with you always." Me and you make we. We shall overcome. And from that humble position, I now have school textbooks used by college students, and it is not uncommon for me to be paid $10,000 for one day of talking. We shall overcome. If you do not let the I get in the way of the we, you can overcome. The scriptures have rightly said, he that is in you is greater than he that in the world. And as long as you remember that, you'll always be able to say, we shall overcome.